Mondale Smith, STVS, Suriname. In reference to your statement on unemployment, which is a major issue in the Caribbean as it relates to the region's youth, ultimately this leads to lots of poverty situations and ultimately crime. Has the CDB, as the main, we want to say, funder or financier of these countries, began consulting with the governments and regional bodies as it relates to working out strategies to deal with this situation in a major way? Because ultimately unemployment leads to crime.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Thank you very much for your question. The issue of unemployment and discussions around it would be part and parcel of the mix of policy issues which would be under consideration when our staff engage with the authorities in our borrowing member countries. We recognize the linkage between unemployment and social issues. Dr. Ram mentioned in his presentation that CDB is going to be conducting, well, we're actually going to be publishing a very important study on youth unemployment. The last time we had this conference, the same issue arose about youth unemployment, and I think at the time we said that the estimates that we were aware of suggested that youth unemployment was somewhere in the region of 30+% of the workforce. That is a very, very high number, and it is a dangerous statistic, and we recognize that it is something that needs to be addressed. It is not an easily tractable problem. Dr. Ram in his presentation spoke about education and the role of education. He made mention of the need to emphasize the STEM type subjects. I think that is part of the root of the issue. We haven't been educating our young people in the appropriate areas. We've been spending a lot on education, but sometimes there's a disconnect between what is coming out of our educational institutions and the requirements of the economies. So I think that is where the discussion really needs to be focused. And hopefully we will get some further clarity when this study has been completed. And we'll be bringing it to the attention of the public, because that's the whole purpose of that exercise.
Thank you. Justin, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I should just add the reason for us publishing this report later this year was because of this very issue. We realize that this is such an important challenge for many of our borrowing member countries that we really needed to have some in-depth research done on this. To first of all find out what is the scale of the problem. We don't have sufficient data on this, and so this publication, this research will provide us with some data estimates. But more importantly, the publication will provide us with hopefully useful policy prescriptions that will allow us to really challenge and to get to the real problem of this and to sort out this problem, as it were, and to provide useful solutions for our policy makers. So we expect to have this report published in May at our Board of Governors meeting, which will be held in St. Kitts.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question?
Yes, to some degree, but ultimately as part of the consultations, just for clarification, in this project that you're working on at present, have you begun consulting in a major way with the main stakeholders?
Yes. Part of the research, we have done consultations within our borrowing member countries. Of course, we might not have consulted in all of the countries, but we certainly have done that with the major stakeholders.
Okay. Could you possibly list for us some of those countries that you would have consulted with?
I know, for example, that we have consulted in Grenada, I believe as well Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica. There might be some other countries, but I don't have the list at the top of my mind, but I can certainly provide that to you at the end of this press conference.
If I may ask one more question, please. How stringent has the CDB been with ensuring that it makes as part of policy to borrowing member countries that they need to seriously focus on youth unemployment, seriously?
It's difficult for me to speak explicitly to that point, but as I indicated earlier, it would be inevitable in the policy discussions that would be taking place between our staff, especially staff from Dr. Ram's department, economics department, that the issue of unemployment would be very much on the table. It affects so many aspects of our lives. The nexus between youth unemployment and crime is one which you alluded to. I think that there's growing evidence that amongst the gang culture are represented large numbers of young people. The young people are now becoming the gunmen. And you know the old adage, the devil finds work for idle hands. I think that adage is as true today as it was when my grandmother used to quote it to me. So that there is no question. I mean, the research that Dr. Ram spoke of will concretize and identify specifically the underpinnings of this problem. But I think that we can already pretty much anticipate where some of the evidence is going to be pointing. And in the bank, we have learned that you really need to arm yourself with the facts before you go off making policy prescriptions. So that what he spoke about in his presentation, which he has elaborated on, is really an effort on the part of the bank to be a little bit more evidence-based in our approach to discussions of policy matters with our countries. So I can assure you, sir, that armed with this type of information, we'll be in a much better position to engage in that discussion and to be impactful in the design of the appropriate interventions.
Thank you very much. I see your hands.
Nadine McLeod, RJR Communications Group. I have, in Kingston, Jamaica, I have 3 questions. One relating to unemployment. Aside from education, which you spoke about earlier, what are some other areas that CBD will be focusing on as it relates to alleviating high unemployment in the region?
Okay. Well, besides focusing on education, we also realize that it's important for our borrowing member countries to have the right business environment to encourage the private sector to thrive, as it were. Why is this so important? We realize that currently there needs to be a shift and certainly a transformation in our economies. We are seeing the spectacle of high debt levels in terms of public finances and the inability of our governments to invest sufficiently for the future. We definitely see a role for the private sector to now be the engine of growth. So we are certainly promoting this as one way to get greater economic growth. And with economic growth, we expect there to be more jobs. So once the private sector has the right climate to invest, and as their output increases, we expect jobs to be created, and this should certainly alleviate the unemployment problem. We are also, of course, still focused primarily on getting our governments, their public finances in order. This is also related to that point about improving the overall business environment. If investors can see and they have a predictable policy and they know where governments are likely to lead, they know what the tax rates are going to be over the next 5 or even 10 years, that provides them with the confidence to invest. And with that investment, we expect there to be, again, more jobs here.
Okay.
Thank you.
My next question has to do with the talks about normalizing relations with the U.S. and Cuba. What impact do you believe this will have on economies in the region, especially those which rely heavily on tourism?
If I could perhaps weigh in on that one initially. There are several views of the possible impacts of that normalization process. There are those who believe that it's going to represent the death knell of tourism as we know it in the region. There are others who see it somewhat differently. They see opportunity where others see threat. They feel that what it's going to do is to stimulate the Caribbean tourism market generally. It's going to widen that Caribbean tourism market. It's going to give more exposure to the products that we have in this region. Those who are inclined to that second view, and I must confess that I'm sympathetic to that position, feel that it creates the opportunity for multi-island, multi-country tourism. If you contemplate, for example, what could obtain between two neighboring countries such as Cuba and Jamaica. Cuba has a very strong, what is called Afro-Latin culture. Jamaica has a very strong, what one might call Afro-Saxon culture. Could you imagine a tourist flying all the way from Europe, arriving in Cuba, starting out his vacation in that environment, and enjoying all the wonderful cultural offerings of the Cuban people, and then coming across to Jamaica and enjoying what that country has to offer, and which is well known and well branded internationally? I think it makes for a tremendous opportunity. And I think that's where we should be focusing. But aside from the tourist industry, one of the things that Cuba brings to our region is the fact of its 12 million plus population. They have what the rest of us don't have. They have critical mass. That country has, whilst they've been isolated, they've been working. They've been skilling their population. They've been developing industries which we don't have in the English-speaking Caribbean. And there's an excellent opportunity for trade and commerce between the countries of the English-speaking Caribbean, those who are members of our institution, and that country. And I would go further to say that I would expect that Cuba is going to want to become more and more part of the family of Caribbean nations. They've always said that. As you know, many Caribbean countries have maintained very close relations with Cuba even during their period of isolation. So the base is laid for a deepening of that relationship to the benefit of the rest of the Caribbean. That's my judgment.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And the last question.
Last question. There is anticipation of the decriminalization of marijuana now in Jamaica. Can you comment on, perhaps, if you have considered, if that happens, the impact on the Jamaican economy and link it to the rest of the region?
The issue remains controversial, largely because the United States still is in a position of uncertainty surrounding how to treat with it. What I see happening is a gradual erosion of the resistance to marijuana, particularly from the standpoint of the medical use of marijuana. My understanding of what is happening in Jamaica, and I expect will ultimately happen perhaps in the other parts of the Caribbean, is that the focus is on that aspect of the marijuana story, medical marijuana. If I could just share a story with you, back in the early 1980s when I worked in Jamaica, the company I worked for financed the research on a product called Canasol. That product was sold in Jamaica. I believe it probably is being sold still in Jamaica. It used to be sold right in this country. And it is a product that's used for glaucoma. And I expect that that is probably one of the early products that was developed from marijuana for medical purposes. We will have to watch. I think that the pace of the development of the medical marijuana industry in the Caribbean is going to be very much dictated by the pace at which the American community adjusts and adapts to this type of process. But we'll have to wait and see. I don't think there's any question that the Caribbean needs to be cautious and careful in how they pursue this matter. We can't be capricious about it because there could be very negative fallout for us.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Felicia Hennis, Radio Anguilla. Dr. Ram mentioned about building resilience, and he talked about the savings of critically low in the member countries. Do you find that with the economic recession, the member countries are more dependent on CDB in terms of funding?
Dr. Ram?
Well, the whole idea about building resilience in our economies, and so therefore we're advocating for countries to increase their levels of savings. This is a policy prescription which we believe that our country should adhere to over the medium term. What has happened recently is that many of our countries have fallen to become heavily indebted, and so they do not have the resources to invest in critical capital, for example, which will actually be the asset base for future economic growth. So therefore, we're saying to countries, first of all, if you are finding yourselves in severe hardship in terms of your public finances, get into a program of fiscal consolidation, get the public finances in order, bring the deficits and the debt levels into sustainable, manageable levels, and then over the medium term, once those levels have been achieved, start saving for the future so that we don't have this problem repeated again. Now, with respect to if countries are coming more to the Caribbean Development Bank for financing, the answer to that is yes, and to some extent also no. Countries do have the need to invest, and because they don't have the resources available at home, they are, of course, coming to the Caribbean Development Bank to assist them, not only to invest in capital goods, but also to assist them with respect to having the correct policies in place to foster growth in the future. And Dr. Smith mentioned in his presentation the policy-based operation, which is a relatively new vehicle for lending from the Caribbean Development Bank to many of our borrowing member countries. Now, it is also important for us to realize that the Caribbean Development Bank is a responsible lender. And so we do not want to be adding unnecessarily to the debt burden of our countries. So we also take that into account when we are considering lending to our borrowing member countries.
On a more local level, how is Anguilla performing in your view? I don't know if Mr. Smith wants to comment on that. You mentioned specifically that you've helped to fund the education sector in Suriname in terms of providing funding towards the community college. I know the CDB also provided funding for the Anguilla Community College, but you didn't mention that. Do you care to say something on that?
Briefly on Anguilla, as you know, Anguilla was one of the Caribbean countries which was most adversely impacted by the Great Recession. Right. Anguilla had been achieving growth rates that were almost stratospheric at some points in time, and it was reflected in the quality of life of the people of Anguilla. Following the Great Recession, the fortunes changed quite substantially, and CDB stepped up to the plate and helped the government of Anguilla to start to address its fiscal issues. My view, I think the numbers indicate that Anguilla grew by about 2% last year, in 2014, which by other Caribbean standards is not such a bad performance. But I think that given some of the challenges you have in that country, that type of growth rate is not going to be sufficient. We are going to be deepening our dialogue with the government of Anguilla to help them to come up with a program that is focused on improving growth prospects. That is where we want to be able to assist them most. There are other aspects of their fiscal consolidation which we'll be discussing with them, but for the time being, that is where I think that our primary focus will be.
Thank you.
I know we are highly dependent on tourism. I realized that you highlighted a number of countries. We had St. Kitts Nevis, Turks and Caicos, fastest growing rates, and then we had big contractions in BVI and Barbados. I can only assume that we fall somewhere in the mid section, that area.
Sorry, I'm not getting the
My
thrust of your
question
question.
is, basically, we are highly dependent on tourism, and I see that TCI and St. Kitts, they were fastest growing in 2014. What probably would you recommend to Anguilla that can help us to step up to the game?
Dr. Rand?
Sure. Well, with respect to tourism arrivals, overall economic growth, Anguilla needs to do a number of things. We were recently in Anguilla. We had a visit there, and we spoke to the authorities as well as to the private sector about what is required to enhance growth prospects in Anguilla. There needs to be a streamlining of the government processes, certainly within Anguilla. It needs to be much easier for businesses to do business in Anguilla. When we spoke to the private sector as well, the number one issue that arose was the high cost of energy. We would recommend that Anguilla look at perhaps encouraging the greater use or the uptake of renewable energy in its energy mix to bring down the overall cost of energy and therefore the cost of doing business. Now, in Anguilla, many tourists arrive via the Blowing Point ferry port. I think it would be desirable if that terminal was improved so that you can actually have more tourists coming in there, improve the efficiency of tourist arrivals. There is also a discussion about the airport, and I think there would need to be a feasibility study as to what sort of airport expansion would be viable for Anguilla. But let me say this. If you were to compare Anguilla with, for example, another destination, St. Bart's, you would find that the overall take per tourist is much less in Anguilla. And one needs to look at this. Why is that? What is the type of product that Anguilla could be offering to tourists to make it a lot more attractive for visitors to want to visit Anguilla as well?
Thank you.
Just one question. We know that the ECCB took over control of two of our local banks. Does this in any way pose, quote-unquote, a threat to our relationship with CDB and Anguilla, or even more of a challenge when you mentioned about the savings?
We are very familiar with the challenges in the financial sector in Anguilla, and the CDB has been in dialogue with the ECCB and other development partners around the question of the resolution of the problems there. I don't really want to speak in any level of detail about that matter, but suffice it to say that to the extent that CDB can be helpful, we will be part of the solution to that issue in your country.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Nicola Barito from Government Information Services Limited in Trinidad and Tobago. Congratulations on CDB's 45th anniversary. Private sector, that term keeps popping up. And I see here and I note that the private sector, in your notes, will have to shoulder more of the financial burden of investing in the region's social and economic infrastructure. We know how difficult it is in terms of the ease of doing business and the bureaucracy, the red tape. How is the CDB, how do you plan to stimulate the private sector in terms of private sector, public-private sector partnership? What is your plan going forward? by extension, stimulating FDIs, and of course, creating that positive climate for investment in the region.
Okay. Well, let me answer the first question on public-private partnerships. In 2013, the CDB undertook a study which looked at debt and why was this a problem in the Caribbean. What were the causes around this? Coming out of that study, we realized that there will still be a need for huge investment in social and economic infrastructure in the Caribbean. And if our governments are constrained with respect to their own finances, it meant that if we are to have economic growth in the future, we still need to have this investment, but that investment now needs to come from a different source, and that is the private sector. And so last year, we also produced a report on public-private partnerships. From that report, we realized that there needs to be the right regulatory environment in our borrowing member countries to encourage that type of partnership to work and to be successful. We have seen a number of good examples of this, for example, in Jamaica, but we have also seen where there have been challenges and they have not worked as we would have liked them to. So at the Caribbean Development Bank, what we have decided to do, and which is now almost up and running, we have set up a PPP unit, a public-private partnership unit. And this will be headed by a coordinator. And this PPP unit is meant to help facilitate public-private partnerships in our borrowing member countries, to help countries assess possible projects where this type of partnership could work, and to also be the conduit, as it were, to get the financing into those projects. So we are therefore being the catalyst, as it were, for this process by having this unit set up within our region. We think that this is an important initiative because when you look at economies of scale, sometimes in some of our borrowing member countries, there may not be many projects where we can use public-private partnerships. And so we think it's much better if these projects are channeled through the CDB so that we can get the economies of scale, we can learn from the lessons from other borrowing member countries and feed those lessons into countries that might be considering doing PPPs. So that certainly is an area where we are working on, and therefore we'll be promoting PPPs in a very meaningful way over the next year to 2 years. So you will look out for that. With respect to having a greater role for the private sector, for having the investment climate that encourages the private sector to thrive, as it were. In my presentation, I mentioned the ease of doing business. When you look at some of the factors around this, and when you compare many of our borrowing member countries to the top-ranked economy, which is Singapore, we realize that there are a number of things that we can do. And some of these things are very much low-hanging fruit. So how long does it take to start a business, for example? How can we get greater access to credit to our entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises? What about the environment to enforce contracts? We can have all of this legislation perhaps enacted across the region to allow and to make it easier for both local entrepreneurs and foreign investors to have the confidence to invest in our region. And we believe over time this will harness and have this structural transformation, which we think will be very important if we are to get to the levels of growth to bring sustainable prosperity to ultimately the people of our countries.
Thank you. The publication is called Public-Private Partnerships in the Caribbean, Building on Early Lessons, and I can make it available afterwards. You have another question?
Just one last
Okay.
question.
Thanks for your patience. I'll come to you next.
You mentioned in your presentation, of course, members of the region putting away for a rainy day. Easier said than done. I mean, I can speak for Trinidad and Tobago. We've got the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. But as the CDB, how can you now not only say it, but encourage particular countries or countries who don't have anything put away to do this? I mean, because I think that's important. I mean, saying that, all right, put aside a penny for if rain falls tomorrow, but this is something that I think that every country within the region should have in place. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah. Yes, and this is why we are advocating for, in effect, I guess similar to what Trinidad and Tobago has, a Heritage and Stabilization Fund. We want to encourage our countries to build in resilience into their economies. Savings, not only for a rainy day, but of course we know that the challenges, the economic challenges, we are small open economies. These economic challenges are on the horizon. They are going to come. And we do not want our economies to become heavily indebted when the next challenge arises. Now, of course, we know that this is going to be a challenge to save now when many of our countries are heavily indebted. So what we are encouraging, we're encouraging countries that are heavily indebted and might also have high fiscal deficits to go down a path of fiscal consolidation. Let's get our debt to GDP levels to a sustainable threshold. And here we normally speak about the 60% of GDP when we speak about sustainable debt thresholds. Let's get to that sustainable debt threshold. And so we are now encouraging countries to engage in what's called counter-cyclical policies. In the good times, when revenues might exceed expenditure, when windfall revenues might come into the coffers, and here I might say certainly in the case of Trinidad and Tobago and the other commodity producers, when those revenues coming from the sales of all the exploitation of those commodities, you need to put aside some of those revenues into a savings fund. Some of our countries currently have what's called the Citizen by Investment program, where revenues are coming into the government, to the treasury. Some of those monies could also be saved in the savings fund as well. So that's how we are likely to do it. Now, we also mentioned before the policy-based loan this is a loan that disburses funds based on conditions where, policy conditions that the governments have to do. So they receive funds from the CDB based on this. Within that, it is likely that if we're advocating for this, we could also have incentives within there for governments to save for a rainy day, once their fiscal accounts allow them to save, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
I have probably 2.5 questions.
Would you kindly say your name?
Oh, sorry. My name is Kenneth Williams. I'm from the St. Kitts Nevis Observer in St. Kitts and Nevis. I noticed that in your portfolio of projects for 2014, I didn't see anything there for St. Kitts and Nevis. Is it that St. Kitts and Nevis graduated because of the high performance?
If I may clarify, that was just a sampling of some of the
Of some of the projects.
The total list of our projects.
Very good. You also mentioned about trying to improve interregional travel. And this almost comes like a soundbite to nearly any of these regional meetings that we attend. CDB should be a sort of reservoir of expertise. Has the bank ever considered, probably it might be doing it, I don't know, doing some kind of pilot project, so to speak, some kind of study as to how to implement a regional travel and shipping that could really work? I'll let you answer that one first and I go to the next one.
Okay, I can answer the question on regional transport, and we're also in the process of doing research on regional transport, particularly with a focus on air transport. We're looking at how to get greater efficiencies, looking at the operation of the regional airlines, what is required to enhance or to improve the efficiency by which we move people and certainly goods throughout the region. Looking at the ways of reducing costs, for example. What's the best approach? Can we have an amalgamation of regional airlines? I don't want to say what the conclusions of that study will be, and we will be publishing that report in May, again at our Board of Governors meeting. So these are the two thematic studies, youth unemployment and air transport. Later in the year, the plan is to then do another study on marine transport in the region. And I would expect at the end of the year, we would also have recommendations to policyholders, to policymakers, as well as to other stakeholders as to what will be required to improve marine transport, both of goods as well as people within the region.
Lastly, Cuba came up in the discussion. The bank sees in the foreseeable future that Cuba might be asked to join the bank?
I think that that's eminently possible. In fact, I would say that some years ago, Cuba had actually expressed an interest in joining the CDB. And we had discussions in the margins of one of our annual meetings with them about this prospect. I think you would appreciate, sir, that in the then context, it would not have been practical because of the relationship that existed between the United States and Cuba and the complications that would have portended for CDB as we operate in the American capital markets. But I think in a new dispensation, as we are seeing emerge, Cuba is part of the Caribbean. Cuba, I think, would be an excellent addition to our institution. Their development experience has been somewhat different from the rest of the Caribbean. But Cuba has had some successes in economic construction, and certainly on the social side, Cuba has very impressive achievements. We in the Caribbean, the rest of the Caribbean, have a lot to learn from the Cubans in that regard.
Don't forget
and I
medicine.
think that,
Don't forget medicine.
yeah, absolutely. So that short answer, yes, I think that Cuba could someday be a member of the Caribbean Development Bank, and it's something that we need to keep in the forefront.
Thank you.
Melania Alphonse, Caribbean News Now. Figure 2, growth percentage in real output. BVI registered 0.1 negative growth. St. Lucia 2.7 negative growth. St. Vincent 1.3% negative growth. Figure 8, regional growth percentage estimates for 2014 and projections for 2015. BVI for 2015 is looking at 0.6%, St. Lucia 1.1%, and SVG 1.5%. The question to both of these diagrams, what are the chronic weaknesses in critical sectors that worry the CDB the most, and how will the CDB address these in order to get to these projections that we're looking at, given the historical factors that have existed before?
Okay. And you're speaking specifically to those?
To those three, because to those three, BVI, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent, because of the negative performance in 2014.
Okay. So with each of those, there is a mixed story here. St. Vincent and the Grenadines and St. Lucia certainly were negatively impacted by the December 2013 weather system, the so-called Christmas Eve trough that affected them. And we didn't expect that to have such a lingering effect on economic output in 2014, but that certainly played a significant role in dragging down the performances of those economies. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have found that they also experienced a decline in the number of visitors arriving on those shores. And so that's an area that they might want to look at, as how they can improve overall visitor arrivals. It might require some different type of marketing of that destination. We know as well that very soon in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there's a likelihood that the new airport will open, and as yet we're not quite clear as to what benefits to the tourism industry that would bring. But one can imagine that that airport would allow the landing of large jet aircraft, meaning that potentially that could also help their overall tourist arrivals. St. Lucia, what we're seeing there is that government finances are quite constrained. government is not investing sufficiently in the capital projects that will boost growth overall. So we see that as being an area that would need to be looked at. Again, this comes back to the earlier point that we know that we need to invest for the future if we are to have the levels of economic growth to increase the overall level of prosperity for our citizens. And if governments cannot invest in the needed capital, then we have to find ways to encourage the private sector to be the conduit of investment and therefore the conduit of growth. So therefore, those are areas where we see areas of improvement and where policymakers certainly need to tackle.
Thank you. Do you have another question? No, that's okay. Thank you. If I may, go to the last table.
No, last year at the press conference, one of the things that you focused on in terms of your internal changes was looking at debt. I'm trying to figure out from you, is there concern in the CDB about the level of debt servicing of the borrowing member countries? Are you satisfied if we put things in place to address any challenges they may have?
No, we are not concerned about the manner of debt service from our borrowing member countries. CDB, I think the records are very clear. CDB has excellent shareholder support from its borrowing member countries. Our collection ratios are outstanding. We don't have any kinds of defaults on our debt service, on the debt service from our countries, such that is not an issue for us. We are concerned about ensuring that we manage our exposure to countries. That is part and parcel of the risk management process that is now entrenched in CDB. So that helps to guide the manner in which we extend new loans to our countries. But no, as far as debt service from our countries is concerned, that is not a problem for CDB.
Thank you.
And Dr. You mentioned in one of the highlights of fiscal consolidation. Are you think that the program Barbados has introduced is working?
Barbados. Well, I should say that Barbados has started to take the necessary steps in order to bring its fiscal accounts into a sustainable level. However, we at the Caribbean Development Bank believe that there's still more that needs to be done. The level of the primary deficit within Barbados and the overall fiscal balance is still at an unsustainable level. And so there is going to be a need for Barbados to have further consolidation. Now, I should say that we don't only advocate for fiscal consolidation, we also advocate for growth-enhancing reforms. How can you also unlock the economic potential that is in Barbados? How can you make it easier for businesses to invest and to help grow the economy? So that's also very important for us. So first, we're saying the government needs to, of course, consolidate further to bring the debt levels to a sustainable level. Right now, it's not at a sustainable level. That needs to come down. But they also need to now encourage the private sector to have that investment climate, as it were, enact certain legislation so that, for example, improve the efficiency of which the port operates at. All of these things together would help boost overall economic growth over the medium term.
Thank you.
Janelle Thornhill, Barbados Advocate. You mentioned about the need to bring down the cost of regional travel. LEAC, I believe it was last week, spoke about their intention to restructure. Do you believe that this will assist in bringing down the cost of regional travel, taking also into consideration that the taxes charged by individual countries are also pretty high?
Dr. Rao?
Okay.
Could you repeat the question, please?
No problem. I'm asking about regional Liat last week noted that their intention is to restructure. Do you believe that this restructuring would help to bring down the cost of regional travel, also taking into consideration that the taxes charged by individual countries also contribute to that high cost?
Yes. Yes, I understand the question. There is no question that the type of service that's currently being offered by Liat is not acceptable. It's inefficient by any measure, and it is not a new development. The discussions that took place in Barbados last weekend, as I understand them, represented a commitment on the part of the shareholder governments to pursue a solution to the long-standing issues surrounding air transport in the Caribbean, and especially as it relates to Liat. Our expectation is that this time round there will be major strides undertaken to try to bring some resolution to that problem. If you have a more efficient air transport system in the Caribbean, reflecting Liat and whoever else might be the players involved, it should have the effect of bringing down the cost of intra-Caribbean air travel. The issue of taxes, Liat is simply a collector of those taxes. What happens is that it gets reflected in the fare. It is almost, as I understand it, between 40 and 50% of the fare, depending on the route. Liat gets blamed for that cost. But even if that were to be eliminated, I expect that with a more efficient operation, you should be able to see a reduction in that overall charge to the traveling public. This is a matter that needs urgent resolution.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have to make my apologies because the CDB only brought one person from
Would you kindly
Belize.
say your name?
My name is Jules Vasquez from Channel 7 News
Welcome. Thank you.
in
for joining
Belize,
us. Please.
where regional travel only goes through Miami.
Okay.
If I may. Sir, first of all, would you be able to speak about, I know the road safety project is a flagship project of the CDB in Belize. I think it's probably 8.4 million US or around there. Would you be able to speak about this project specifically as it affects youth, since Belize has the highest mortality rate for traffic accidents in Latin America?
Well, I did make reference to it in my presentation. I don't want to take the time here to go into the details of that project, except to say that it is one that we are promoting heavily across our member countries. And Belize was one of the early beneficiaries of it. When I was in Belize, I was able to experience the enthusiasm of the Belizean people for this project, especially the young people. And it was heartwarming for me. And what it simply did was to underscore our conviction that this is something that needs to be spread across the region with greater intensity, because it directly affects the quality of life of people. So that's all I'd like to say on it, but it's a very, very good project.
Okay, and then, sir, if you could, would you all speak about you spoke about indebtedness, but when it comes to debt, the elephant in the room is the Venezuelan debt and the Petro-Carib initiative.
Yeah.
Are you able to speak about how that indebtedness, because of its particularity, it is a concessionary rate, you can pay for it in goods, how it fits into the entire profile of the region's indebtedness?
Dr. Smith?
The Petro-Carib facility has represented an opportunity for our countries to put their house in order. In some instances, the Petrocaribe facility has been used reasonably effectively. In other instances, not so much. The issue today is that Venezuela is experiencing extreme economic challenges, and as a consequence, there are concerns about the sustainability of the program. We at the Caribbean Development Bank, we feel that what is happening in Venezuela and the issues surrounding the sustainability of the Petrocaribe facility is those are very clear indications that we need to intensify the work that we have been promoting to increase energy security in the Caribbean. We need to not only exploit the resources that are available from the Petrocaribe facility to accelerate the development of renewables in the countries that are signatories to the Petrocaribe facility. But generally speaking, what we need to do is to accelerate the overall process to achieve greater energy security. In short, what I'm saying is, regard it as a threat, but also see it as an opportunity to do the right things that will enable us to be more resilient. Dr. Ram has been talking about resilience. This has been a theme that has been running through this press conference today. We've been talking about weather resilience. We've been talking about economic resilience. Resilience to energy, external energy sources is also an imperative for the stability and the sustainable growth of the Caribbean.
Thank you.
If I may, would you, sir, speak about Belize's economic growth? I see it here pegged at 3.4%. We had it slightly lower than that, around 2%, which is quite significantly lower, but we'll go at the 3.4%. Are you able to see how that fits into the entire region's growth? Particularly, I saw cruise tourism had outpaced, the growth in that sector had outpaced most in the Caribbean.
Yes. Let me say that our figure for 2014 is a preliminary estimate, and it's likely that over the coming weeks or even month or so, this figure could be revised. But this is our best estimate at this point in time because we haven't got all of the data coming in. Yes, what we have been seeing in Belize is that the tourism is quite robust there, and we expect that to continue. Tourism into Belize is not only related to leisure travel as well. Belize is also a very attractive destination for individuals who are considering retiring there as well. So what you have happening is that you have people coming into Belize to have a look at where they might live in the future. And so this is rebounding to the benefit of the overall economic growth within Belize. So when related to tourism, we would expect as well that there might also be an increase in construction activity, as you need to have more facilities for tourists to stay, as well as for those thinking about retiring in Belize. So that's also going to have a significant impact on economic growth there.
Thank you.
And then as I leave, climate change?
We have three more questions and one from online. Please, very quickly, Belize.
Yes, if I just go quickly, what overarches everything we speak about is climate change, particularly in the tourism sector, since small island developing nations are the most vulnerable. Is there anything, I know the bank's efforts have been focused on the alleviation of helping those in vulnerable circumstances, but how about climatological circumstances? Thank you.
Can I just quickly answer? Yes, the bank has resources available to address climate adaptation. And I believe it was last year that we did a climate adaptation project in Belize using a line of credit called the climate action line of credit, which is provided to us through the European Investment Bank. There are ample opportunities in Belize for climate adaptation projects, and we expect to be doing several more projects like that in the future.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yes. Good day. Emmanuel Joseph, Barbados Today. Barbados has been one of the, if you wish, one of the main victims of the rating agencies. How serious do you think we should take the rating agencies' analysis, considering that our Minister of Finance seems not to be losing any sleep much sleep over there?
Dr. Ram?
Sure. Well, when you look at the methodology which the rating agencies apply to look at sovereign credit, it's clear that that methodology is quite sound. The ratings that the rating agencies give on sovereign debt, for example, are very important for countries because it provides an indication as to what the cost of borrowing is likely to be for that country when it goes out into the capital markets to finance its development. So I would suggest that the ratings that the agencies provide should be looked at as an indication as to how the economy is performing, how government finances are, and I think they should be given a level of importance and respect.
My final quick question, do you see any signs that the Caribbean is moving out of the recession?
Yes, of course. The Caribbean is. Following on from the growth in 2013, we've seen overall growth again in 2014. So yes, we are slowly moving out. What I would say is that the overall level of growth is still not at a level that is sufficient to live many more people out of poverty and to have an increased level of prosperity. Caribbean has made significant strides since many of our countries gained independence. And so we want to actually now lock in those benefits, but there are also significant gains that are still required if we are to have the level of prosperity to get our ultimate stakeholders, the ordinary citizen in the street, to feel the overall benefits of economic prosperity. So yes, we are moving out of recession. That has been happening over the last couple of years, but I would say that still more needs to be done. We need to increase the overall level of growth, and we also need to ensure that that growth is inclusive so that the most vulnerable in society also feel the benefits associated with that growth.
Thank you.
Good morning. Reshma Raghunath, Trinidad, from the Guardian Media Limited. Earlier in your speech, Dr. Ram, you spoke about the solution for unemployment across the region, and that's free labor movement. Do you see governments lacking that will or that commitment to open the region to that free movement, or is it that there's a lack of policy to allow for this? As you know, immigration is an issue in the region and globally as well. So what would be your recommendations for regions to allow this free movement of labor to help with the unemployment problem?
Well, I said so in light of the evidence which I showed on the slide, where you're able to see quite clearly that we do have unemployment. We do have a problem of unemployment in some of our territories. Now, we don't have the data for all of our territories, but for the territories which I showed, so for example, in St. Lucia, unemployment there is in excess of 25% of the workforce. That's very, very high. When you look at the overall number of people, that's about 20,000 or thereabout. When you look at other territories within the Caribbean, the unemployment rate is particularly low. And so it means that perhaps in some territories, there is a need for more labor, as it were. So what we're saying here is that we need to make it easier for labor to move, and not only labor, but also for capital to move throughout the region to help alleviate some of these problems. And this really is a principle of the single market and economy, which our CARICOM governments have all signed up to. I should say that there is the ability for some classes of labor to move freely, and that refers specifically to skilled laborers, those who have university degrees or some other type of skill where they can get accredited by governments to allow them to move freely. But I think the overall premise of seeing the overall economic benefits associated with the regional integration could benefit and rebound to the benefit as well with respect to the labor market.
Thank you. Jamaica, you had another question.
Sure.
Thank you, Laura.
Simone Hilton from the Jamaica Information Service, Jamaica. Just want some specifics as to what are some of the projects that the CDB will be working with Jamaica for 2015, if you have any.
I'm sorry, could you repeat, please?
Just asking if there are any projects that you will be working with Jamaica on in 2015, if you care to outline any of those projects.
I think the answer would be there are none in the pipeline at this stage specifically. Just last year, we approved nearly $50 million of new loans to Jamaica. I spoke to them in my I spoke to the policy-based loan of $35 million, but there was also a $15 million line of credit which was provided to the Development Bank of Jamaica. And the idea was to target those sectors of the economy that are growing. Business process outsourcing was one. The other was renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the third sector was the agricultural sector, mainly the agro-parks. So long and short of it is that we made a substantial loan to Jamaica last year. And it is possible through different mechanisms that we could be making other investments in Jamaica. We have a soft window, and there are some resources that are still left in that soft window for Jamaica. So it will be targeted at social programs, which are very, very much needed in that country.
BNTF remains vibrant. Dr. Smith, would you like to thoughts on those?
BNTF, yes. We have a basic needs trust fund program in Jamaica that is targeted at the poorest of the poor. We collaborate with the Jamaica Social Investment Fund as our implementing agency for that project. And we have a lot of respect for JSIF. We think they're an excellent entity. So that relationship will continue in the future.
And the CDRFF launches 2 projects next week. Would you like to listen?
Yes, we also have a program that's called the Caribbean Community Disaster Risk Reduction Facility. I think that's what it's called. CDB, as I said, loves these acronyms. But the whole idea is that it's a community-based program where you're trying to build resilience against natural disasters at the community level. And we're going to be launching 2 projects, sub-projects in Jamaica under that program. I think it's next week, Cleo?
Yes, yes, thank you. And our key partners?
Our key partners there would be DFAT-D. I think I see our alternate director here who represents DFAT-D. Also in that program is DFID, which is the British Aid Agency, and the European Union has more latterly agreed to put funding into that program. So we have good support for that very, very important intervention.
And that will be, that would be additional funding other than what?
That's correct.
Okay, that would be, can you give a figure for that?
I didn't hear that.
Can you give a figure for that in terms of funding for that project?
For that program, I think, is in excess of $20 million US, but it's a regional program, so Jamaica doesn't get all of it.
But we can provide details afterwards, please. Speak with me. My My card is also in the press kit, so any follow-up questions, I'll be happy to facilitate. Please, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Good morning. Esther White from the Anguillian newspaper. We spoke earlier about investment and the free movement within the region, right, to help better the countries from their debt relief. So my question is, do you all have any projects in place that will help these countries in terms of safeguarding against bad investments? Because some investments are good, but sometimes they tend to turn out bad in the end, and therefore they tend to come back to the CDB for helping, and that will cause a strain. And currently now in the region, there are programs such as citizenship by investment programs and such as that. And they're bringing good investments, but in terms of the fallout, are there programs in place to try and help these countries to safeguard themselves a little better? Because a good investment coming in to certain countries, they're willing to take it because it looks good, but in the long-term effect.
Dr. Ram?
Sure, okay. But with respect to investment coming into the countries, what we do encourage our countries to is to undertake feasibility assessments of any investment. Here, we encourage these feasibility studies to look not only at the economic benefits, but also the social as well as the environmental benefits. When you bring all of these together as an aggregate, you're able to see what's the real rate of return for your economy, not only in terms of the finances, but in terms of what it might mean in terms of jobs, in terms of overall levels of output for the economy. So we certainly encourage this. At the Caribbean Development Bank, when we provide loans to our board member countries, we also encourage them to follow our very strict procurement guidelines as well, which means that these loans come with the, what should I say, safety mechanisms in place to ensure that goods and services are procured in the most efficient and certainly ethical way, so that the true benefits of any investment rebounds to the people of that country that might be borrowing that money.
Thank you. We have one question from an online participant in Guyana. Dr. Ram, would you comment on the performance of the Guyanese economy in 2014?
Yes, okay. So, like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, Guyana's economy expanded still at a very robust rate in 2014. But what we saw in 2014 was that there was some decline in the amount of commodities that were declared to the government. And here in particularly, I'm speaking about gold declarations. And so that had a bit of a drag on economic output in 2014. However, because of the overall level of expenditure with respect to investment in construction activity, particularly led here by private sector investment, the overall growth rate remained fairly robust in Guyana. Now, we expect in 2015 that the overall level of economic growth to be improved in Guyana, and I think we are estimating in the region of about 4.3 to 4.5% economic growth. Why is that? There's a particularly big investment in Guyana, and here is the Guyana Goldfields mine that is likely to come on stream during the course of 2015. And we expect that there will be an improvement in gold declarations coming from this investment. And so we expect economic growth to improve in 2015 in Guyana.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're a little over time, but I'll just allow two last questions, especially for anyone who has not had a chance to ask. Okay, Nadine? Yeah, quickly.
Okay, Nadine McLeod, RGR Communications Group in Kingston, Jamaica. Just one question. Is the CBD satisfied with the projects with which the bank is involved with in Jamaica? Projects over the years, of course.
That's a very loaded question. I think that if I'm speaking here from memory, but CDB each year does a review of the performance of its projects, and we tend to rate the country's performance in respect of the portfolio that we have in that country. Speaking from memory, my recollection would be that Jamaica is in pretty decent shape as far as project performance is concerned.
Thank you.
Quickly?
Mondale Smith, STVS, Channel 8, Suriname. The question it has to do with the Suriname being able to access the $16 million to focus on tech VAC.
Yes.
The CDB has highlighted the tech VAC investment of $16 million to its most recent borrower, that is Suriname.
Yes.
Are you satisfied with how it is working so far?
Well, the short answer, sir, is that it's very early days. The project has just recently been approved, so that there would have been, we're in the early preparatory stages of getting the project going, so that I don't think there would have been any disbursements up to this point. So we can talk about it next year.
Thank you. And finally,
Dr. Smith, Dr. Ram, can we shed some more light on the $40 million loan to Trinidad and Tobago, and how do you think moving forward this will assist the region in terms of energy security?
Dr. Ram?
Sure. So the $40 million policy-based loan provided to Trinidad and Tobago, it's an attempt, as you know, you're from Trinidad, as you know, Trinidad and Tobago currently has subsidized fuels for domestic consumption. Here we're speaking mainly about road transport fuels, gasoline, diesel. This subsidy is a cost to the government, and our policy-based loan is an attempt to lower the overall cost of this subsidy to the government by encouraging the uptake of compressed natural gas, which is not subsidized in Trinidad and Tobago. So the idea of this loan is to have the policy environment which allows consumers to certainly have the incentive to switch from using gasoline in their vehicles or diesel in their vehicles to now switching to using compressed natural gas, which is not a subsidized fuel. But however, the overall cost to the consumer wouldn't vary as that much. So there is unlikely to be an impact on their pockets, except with respect to the capital conversion of their vehicles, because they need to convert their gas or diesel vehicles to use compressed natural gas. We see this as a very innovative approach, and in fact we expect that this can also be replicated in some of our other borrowing member countries, where we can use a policy-based instrument to encourage other countries now to move away from perhaps also subsidized fuels, and to help engender a sense of greater energy security, so that we can get first of all, our government's finances in better shape, thereby reducing the overall subsidies that they provide for current energy use, and also to improve the overall efficiency of our economies. Because if we're using fuels or energy sources that are less costly, we expect to see the overall cost of living, and therefore the overall cost of doing business in that particular economy to come down. So this is why we see this particularly initiative as perhaps being very useful, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, but also for our other borrowing member countries.
Thank you. Colleagues, you have been excellent. Thank you so very much for joining us today and for the very thought-provoking questions. We hope you've been satisfied in the extent and depth of the answers. All the material presented here and which are in your press kit have either been emailed to you already or will be within the next hour. Any follow-up questions, please send me an email, lewiskl, that is Lewiskl @caribbank.org, and we will address as best as possible, but I encourage you to try to make the most of this moment. And we look forward to your responses. Thank you so very much. Gentlemen, thank you.